My name is Manju Chathani, and I'm very excited to have a chance to talk today with Morenike Ukpong and Yvette Raphael about the importance of prevention advocacy when we're looking at women's health priorities. And we're going to have a short conversation about it, and hopefully this will be just one of the many conversations we'll be having after CROI to talk about what we learned here. So first, let me introduce Yvette Raphael from South Africa and Morenike Ukpong from Nigeria. And maybe to get us starting, I'll ask each of you to just tell us a little bit about yourself and more importantly about the work you do at home with women.
Okay, my name is Yvette Raphael, as you said, Manju. I'm with Center for Communications Impact in South Africa. I'm also an AVEC fellow, and I work with young women in South Africa on the Zazi program and other advocacy work. I started working with HIV/AIDS and HIV advocacy when I was diagnosed 15 years ago. So it's been a long time and exciting to be around this time when so much is happening around prevention.
Great. Morenike?
I am Morenike Ukpong. I introduced myself by saying I primarily in my living from being a lecturer with the Obafemi Awolowo University, but I spend it on my advocacy work, which is my heart, the heart of what I really want to do. And I advocate around community engagement in research primarily, but focus on promoting the concept of ethics and research that looks more at the community rather than just the individual. And that work of mine spans around working with people living with HIV as well as key populations.
Great. So we're at CROI in Boston, and this conference has been very important for prevention. We heard consistently through the conference that young African women are at high risk for HIV and continue to be so. And we also heard of some interesting new prevention. So perhaps I'll ask both of you as well to talk a little bit about why it's important for people who are looking at women's health advocacy to focus on HIV prevention research. Why should we do that? Morenike?
I think one of the ways I'll address this was one of the outcomes of the CROI meeting, the pre-conference that we had, the Martin Delaney lecture, where one of the speakers highlighted the issue about HIV as well as women's health, and kind of advocated for an expansion of the concept of women's health beyond integrating contraceptive into care, but looking at sexual and reproductive health as a whole, knowing that the context of the life of women is just beyond HIV. And so I think what I'm trying to say is that, yes, while we're looking at addressing women's health, we also must think beyond HIV, because the life of women and the things that make women at risk is beyond HIV. It's about the social, political, cultural issues around their lives that predisposes them. Yet, we do appreciate that HIV is central. And thinking about that, especially with respect to where I come from, Africa and Nigeria especially, I think one of the success stories that we have in Indian women's health around HIV is the access to funds and access to structure and access to human capacity that can facilitate the building and development of a health system, that will enable the health system address the whole concept of women's health. So yes, I don't think women's health is all HIV, but I think we can make HIV central in a way that helps us expand to really address the very needs of women's health in Africa.
Great. And what about in South Africa, Yvette? What can you say about the importance of prevention?
I think for us in South Africa it's important because we are one of the countries hardest hit by HIV/AIDS new infections amongst women 16 to 24, 15 to 24. And for us it's almost, we are on an emergency mode where we need to urgently find ways to engage young women, ways to understand what the structural barriers as well as other issues are, that the biological issues that actually is making it so difficult to reach this group. So I think it's important for researchers to look beyond just the medical, like Morenike is saying. However, for us is to focus on HIV as well as understanding the young women's health and reproductive health rights of young women in South Africa, because there is a gap. Something is not right. It's not adding up. We cannot struggle so much to get infections down in this particular age group and have it be business as usual. More investment needs to be made. We can no longer dream above, the pie in the sky. We can no longer dream. We need to go down to these young women and sit with them and understand what the issues that is preventing them from accessing services, accessing research, and as well as participating in research and understanding and seeing the light of what this would mean for them if they participate fully. And I think that's where I have a struggle with how investment is made towards this particular group, is that we want to do it for them. I think it's time that we bring young women to the table. And if it's difficult to bring them to the table, I think we should go and fetch them and bring them to the table to understand the importance of this, because I'm almost worried that we're going to miss an age group in South Africa where we don't understand what happened to this young woman. And we know so far who infects who in South Africa, and it's definitely not the boys their age who's infecting them. However, there's some research that shows differently, that it's actually not the older men that's the problem to these women, but what is the problem? And I think research needs to invest in finding out where is this problem and bring the young girl to the table.
I would like to build on that. I mean, just as you go on, I think one of the things I hear and I've heard consistently is about, bringing, as opposed to reaching. And one of the things I think I want to highlight within that context is over and over, we've heard the non-success with the HIV response with adolescents and young women. Adolescents as a whole, young women in particular. Within the US world, there's a lot around young MSMs, not only young MSMs, but also blacks. But one of the things I think is if we seem to appreciate that the challenges we have with adolescents, it's not just because they're adolescent, but it also has to do with who they are. And we can really change that. I think it's, I'm sorry, for lack of what, we're just going the wrong way, trying to make them change. It's them. So why do we think we're going to make a success of changing them and helping them understand? And one of the things I contextualize about, especially for me when I also listened again to the ring study, Jesus, we have the same repeated story, despite the history telling us this is the way we're going to go. So one of the things I think is, look, okay, let's learn what works in general, independent of the adolescent. Okay, this works. It's not like trying to find out if it works for adolescent. Let's leave that out. But now, once we understand if it works, now see how to contextualize that in their social life. And when we do that, we're not bringing them. We're going to have to reach them within the context of their life and understand how that. So it's not about if this works or not. We've moved away from that because the working, except if we think that the issues around biological factors that are peculiar to adolescents that might impact on working, effectiveness, efficacy, you know what the science word is. But once it says nothing about biology that impacts on what the effectiveness, efficacy of it, make it work. Demonstrate, and that's what we do in medicine. That's what we've done forever. We understand how medicine, drugs work, and then we adapt it for children. So if this, I think that's, for me, that's one of the things. I don't think we're going to ever succeed on making adolescents and young persons be who they are. That's why I'm not going to ask anybody to lose his or her youthfulness because I want to do trials. I'll rather work around making that success and have context. And when you do that, the context is different. It's going to be different in US, in Nigeria, South Africa. It's going to be different. It's not one trial that can do that. And that's a different ballgame. Just like we're trying to contextualize HIV response, HIV behavior change in every culture. We're not doing trials that is bringing them. My thoughts about mine.
I think that's really interesting in talking about not trying to change young people to make them understand why they need this, but rather contextualize the intervention so it fits in their lives. So, Pat, before maybe we talk about some of the new biomedical HIV prevention, maybe we can talk for a second about contraceptive services or sexual reproductive health services. And what do we know about the way young women access them or don't? And what's a crucial lesson in that for you that we should be thinking about when we are thinking about future HIV prevention access? Yvette?
I think most of the issue with accessing contraceptives in South Africa is the issue around what does the man think about it. And it's been something that we've given over to our young people and young women as older women, is that we make them believe that a man should make the choice for them. So
agree.
it's usually around it. We have the implant on in South Africa. It's an implant. Young women, it was rolled out. Young women could. And then suddenly we have a rise up of young women taking it out because their boyfriends can feel it in their arm. And those are the things we need to talk openly about and teach the young women agency. And I think that's where the Zazi program comes in. And the work I did with my fellowship is that how do we make young women feel empowered enough to know that my decision is about me, and for me to change my life or to be active in around the issues that are social. You know, we cannot continuously say these are the issues that are barriers for them, but they need to come to, and I say it again, they have to be part of this at the table and make us understand the issues that affects them. So unless we change that, so with contraceptives, it's the same old thing, is that it's available, young women access it, but other people make choices for them. When you go to a clinic, a sister or a nurse in our setting in South Africa would then decide for you what you can get. You know, the government would decide, okay, we're rolling out Implanon. You know, everybody, it's a one size fits all. Every young person between this age and that age must get Implanon. However, these young women are never asked, you know, what would you prefer? Would you prefer the injection? Would you prefer the pill? Would you prefer the Implanon? So I think that's where we are missing our young women, and we're missing giving them that agency to say, I choose to take a pill. I choose to have an implant because my situation does not allow me to access the clinic every day, or whatever their reasons are for not accessing it. And until we get to that point and having enough in the basket for them to choose, we are going nowhere slowly.
Also to build on that, I'll defer to two things in the last few weeks and my experience, and I can agree more with Vaughan in terms of the culturalization of the way we think. So we were with young adolescents and we were asking around, I can't remember, but the shocking thing, yes, it was about gender violence, and these were young girls. You know, one of the responses, the major responses, because we wanted to look at what they want and how, and what are the values to promote, you know, men and women standing up against gender violence. You know what the value was? To be able to tolerate.
To be able to tolerate.
Tolerate, that women should tolerate, be more tolerant. And I was shocked. I said, these are young adolescents who have already culturalized that gender violence in homes should be domestic violence. You should tolerate that. I think we're really going down a path, you know. And one of the things that I think is clear also with the science is what we can use to make changes in terms of contraceptive access and what we're not doing. One of the success stories in terms of promoting contraceptive access is school clinics. But tell me, I don't think there's any school clinic of mine that will include a condom, less so every option. And so if by adolescence you're already open and contraceptive access is a norm, I think it reduces the process of you thinking, within the context of your life, you're living with men and women as class peers in school, and then you can access contraceptives if you want it. It starts to erode those fundamentals that makes you think you're secondary to a man in every way you think. But having said that, I can't, for the country I come from, I can't take away the role of religion. It's so strong and it keeps reinforcing, even from birth, you know, this process that everything about you becomes secondary. And that's why you would start contraception and then you get involved in a relationship that is not even married, and then you take it up to please the boyfriend, not even married, you know. So I think there's a long way to go, but I don't think it's an impossibility if we start to channel education appropriately, and such education should start very early. That is one of the fights I think we should, as advocates, should take forward. There's a lot of resistance about education very early. We start it later. So why not advocate for those changes and make those things happen and ensure that we hear the voices of the young ones who themselves can say, look, we can do it early. And the fact that I'm advocating doesn't mean I'm promiscuous.
So, we've been talking a lot about current challenges for young people and young women in particular to access contraceptive services, but also to have more agency in their decisions. So I want us to change tack just a little bit to actually talk about what's coming up in the future. So at this conference, we heard about, first of all, pre-exposure prophylaxis. PrEP is finally showing its face in several countries. There are guidelines being developed, and we're seriously thinking of implementation. And finally starting to hear that young women deserve to have access to PrEP. And then the second thing we heard really exciting at this conference were results from 2 trials, from the Depiverine ring trials that showed some success from both of them in using a ring filled with the ARV called Depiverine used for 4 weeks at a time. But what we did see in those trials were that younger women didn't use them from the results. And that there are many plans ahead. So I guess I'm interested in hearing from both of you, in light of what you've talked about, the challenges that already exist, what does this new prevention interventions mean for young women in your countries?
Okay, so you know that I've been very behind PrEP advocacy and PrEP access in South Africa, and particularly fighting for it for young women to access PrEP. So this would go back to the point I made earlier, is that prevention advocacy, we need to look at it. HIV prevention, we need to look at it exactly as we look at contraceptives. Nothing would fit everyone. So for us, it's the ring. We know the ring works if you use it. So we will not go into the other small parts of it. So the same with PrEP. We know PrEP works if we use it. So we need to just ensure that young people understand this point and get enough information. And I'm still of that view that young women got from us the submissive, the asking, permission for. We need to undo that. All the women in this field need to undo what we've given over to our younger children to say, now let's get our agency back. Let's understand that for us to not become HIV infected like our parents, I'm HIV positive, we need to have some will to fight this, to live and to make decisions for ourselves. If I depend on somebody else to make a decision for me, we can make everything available. A lot of these interventions and methods and the rings and everything can become available. However, if our young people cannot use it for whatever reason, maybe it's structural, maybe it's biological, it's not going to get us anywhere. So we need to look at how do we get to that point where we do the education, we do the motivation, we do the encouragement of young people. Young people in South Africa particularly are at the very, at crossroads where they finish high school and they're unemployed. A lot of them depend on somebody else to make things happen for them. And a lot of these young people are born in child-headed households. Their parents just die, grow up in the situation, and you find they have to make decisions and choices around who can give what to me. So if this person is uncomfortable with with a implant in my arm, I have to make that decision for them. So I think what we need to do is just expand this toolbox and give young women an option to choose. However, it's our responsibility to empower them to come to the table and understand. I still say we need to bring them to the table. We're too much in a point where we want to make all of these things happen and say, does it fit you? Let them tell us, what are the barriers? Why is it so difficult for them?
Yeah. And just to add to that, I also recognize the social context, the political context in terms of access. And so we can take away the place of governments to ensure access. I laughed when you raised it because we're still at the point of pushing PrEP, And within the context of PrEP, believe me, I've come from a country where we're still pushing condom access. We're still pushing FLHE, life education. We're still pushing that, And the gap between the North and the South is growing. I listened to gene therapy yesterday and I just went, this is another world. Yet it's a possibility somewhere, but I'm still struggling with basic access to health. We're having people who come into the clinic because of care, access to care, not because they're preventing, not because they don't know. It's just a whole structural issue. And for me, I've believed a long time in terms of pushing, for people to demand. When people demand things, it goes beyond government policy or not. If people decide they want opium, even the government doesn't make it available, they'll get it across the borders. So one of the things I think in terms of moving PrEP forward, in terms of moving access to ring forward, is mass education. I was looking at Hopes, this guy who got the award at the opening, the AMFA guy. I love the advert. 40 million people are infected, 0 million is cured. I can't read that message and leave that place the same. I can never, whoever I am, even if I'm a kid, it's going to think something. The thing might not make me do something now, it might make me do something years down the line, but it's gonna click, So I think those are the kind of things we get there. We get information, even if there's no access, that there's something called PrEP, there's something called the ring, and it can work. And when people start demanding, you're going to have to answer. I come to my clinic, I need PrEP, and the doctor says, what's PrEP? You don't know, and I educate you. And then I go to 10 and 50 people come. You as a doctor will make PrEP available, whether there is policy around it or not. So for me, I think that's one of the powerful ways to make changes, especially with our government that is very slowly responsive. But yet we have individuals that are ready to take actions. Push, market socially these issues, let people know about them, and start to create a demand that would change us to drive policy changes.
Thank you so much, Morenike and Yvette. This has been really a fun conversation and inspiring, because in spite of all the challenges you described, you talked about ways forward, and you talked about women's empowerment, about really encouraging women's agency, about making sure that young women are part of this conversation, making sure that we contextualize the interventions rather than force young people to change, to adjust to the interventions we give. And you talked about voicing the demand, and that we make policy by our voices. And I really hope that whoever watches this interview gets what I got from talking to you, and moves forward. And thank you to everyone who's watched this for a little while for us. And hope that this conversation inspires you to have this kind of conversation in your own communities and in your own offices and under trees and in ladies' rooms with everyone you talk to. And for more information about women's health advocacy and HIV prevention, and to get in touch with these fantastic women, please feel free to get in touch with me, Manju Chathani at AVAC, manju@avac.org. Thank you.